All right. I didn't realize it was going to be such a dynamic 3:30 group in this late afternoon presentation, but we are thrilled to be here today. My name is Jeremy Moran. I'm our VP of Strategy at Drumline. We are a Dallas-based, fully woman-owned professional services firm, and we like to say we sit at the intersection of data, technology, math, and marketing. With me is Allison Marx, our Senior Solutions Architect. And like I said, today, keeping with the theme, we're thrilled to be here to talk about governance. Everybody kind of stole my thunder, starting with Kyle. We were going to lead our way into talking about the Salvation Army specifically, but we're really excited to kind of share that ongoing success story that we have with them. And I imagine that outside of this conference, the word thrilled and governance are not often spoken amongst the teams that you guys interact with regularly, but we really are genuinely excited to be here to share their story. Before we dive in, I want to start with an analogy that we feel really encapsulates probably why most of us are here today. And that is, a man with one watch knows what time it is, and a man with two watches is never quite sure. We heard this recently, and we thought, what better way, right, to relate the challenges of governance to a nonprofit organization that's over 150 years old. And in the digital world, our watches or our data systems, they can tell very different things if they're not synchronized. They can inform very different decisions. So, before we go further, we're going to use our interactive poll. Hopefully this works. I want to ask, how would you characterize governance within your organization? So let's get abstract for a minute and see what folks are saying. We got 0%, so hopefully this thing's working, or else we might have to go back to the analog way too.
They're probably reading all your options, Jimmy.
Okay, here we go. And I should say you can probably notice one of the nuances in the questions that's being asked in here. So there's two that are very similar but are intentionally different. And that is, we're wearing multiple watches, all of them tell different times. My team knows the correct time, but the rest of the organization is misaligned, which as we're seeing these results come through, it seems like that's probably the main story here. The other one was that we're wearing multiple watches, all of which tell different times, but we're all clear, we're all aligned as an organization, right? So, and then the happy path is we have one watch and it's perfectly synchronized. So it seems like our results are a mix of everything, but probably a little bit more feeling like as teams you feel like you know exactly what the right time is, and you feel like your watches are synchronized, but it's a difficult process to get the rest of your organization aligned around that. And that's pretty much the theme of our story today, so validating, I guess, that that's the case. I want to talk a little bit about the Salvation Army. I assume most folks, probably everybody in this room, knows who they are. You probably dropped a donation in their red kettle during the holiday season, or maybe you've donated a couch or some clothes to their thrift stores. The Salvation Army is a fixture within the United States. It's one of the largest nonprofits, and they operate globally, and they serve and meet human need across 134 countries. We work with the Salvation Army US, their largest organization within the world, and just to give you a sense of the scale of the services they provide, last year alone they assisted over 27 million people in the United States. And they did that across hundreds of their different programs, which they operate across 6,000 US centers of operation. So they really have a remarkable impact in terms of meeting human need. And surprisingly, even though it is an enormous organization, the Salvation Army's strength really lies with its local focus, and that's critically important to how they serve their mission. But that local focus, it creates a lot of unique challenges for the Salvation Army. For instance, decision-making related to fundraising and marketing operations is spread across a whole bunch of different parts of the organization. And even though they have national marketing initiatives and fundraising initiatives, they really try to empower, and will always try to empower, local teams to galvanize support within their communities. So this is the structure of the organization. I don't want to spend a lot of time going through it. But again, decision-making, data systems, the way that they operate, all of it is sort of shared across all of these different areas of the organization. They operate 4 different territories within the United States and divisions underneath that, and then their cores, which are built to serve locally. So you can probably imagine, when you just look at this alone, the challenges that they have regarding governance. Drumline has been fortunate enough to work very closely with the Salvation Army at all levels, but particularly with the national part of the organization, as Allison mentioned earlier. And our initial engagement with them was very basic. We supported some of their digital experience measurement and helped their national media campaign optimization. But in that decade of working with the Salvation Army, we've really helped expand their data and analytics capabilities across digital experience, fundraising, operations, and media. And the goal, as cheesy as it might sound, is truly and has been to use data for good, and to connect the Salvation Army not only with its supporters, but also its beneficiaries, the people that they serve. And that's what brings us to today. The landscape with which the Salvation Army has operated, like I mentioned, has created quite a bit of fragmentation. And they recognize that. And so at the beginning of this year, they embarked on a true digital transformation. And I really emphasize truly major transformation, because as Allison mentioned earlier, we were talking about hundreds of different domains and subdomains. We're talking about thousands of pages, very disparate marketing initiatives. And they knew they had to change that. They knew that they needed to make some significant moves to bring the Salvation Army and its supporters and its beneficiaries closer together. And when the project kicked off, the Salvation Army turned to us as their partner to help evolve their data strategy, their measurement framework, and their customer journey. And we really understood that from the beginning there were going to be 2 crucial elements of success. The first was democratization. So getting more data, insights, and technology into the hands of all of those different parts of the organization to better inform their decision making, to help them connect with their local constituents, and really drive their mission forward. And in order to do that, right, the key component and our second area of focus was governance. We wanted that to be a key driver of democratization. We didn't want it to be a limiting factor, but we knew at that point there needed to be guardrails, because the way that they were operating was really working against, again, their mission. So that's where we're going to focus today, not the democratization side, although I'd love to talk to anybody about how we're kind of going about that side of the fence, but really more on the governance side. So I'll hand it over to Allison to take you through our work in that.
Thanks, Jeremy. See if I can work this thing. Okay, so now we're going to dig a little deeper into the specific challenge that their organizational structure kind of caused when it comes to their digital ecosystem. Despite their noble mission, their decentralized nature resulted in kind of a fragmented user experience, among other things. This example is for me. I live in Georgia, and when I went out to their websites pretending to be a donor, a volunteer, or a person who needs support, what I experienced was a lot of different URLs, different applications. They have kind of a different appearance and a way of interacting with them. And because we're partnered with them, I know that this is a result of different people and teams running different tags and technologies. They have different goals, different marketing tactics. And because of how this is instrumented, as a user, I see then a message that is not well coordinated. So I might get an email about one thing, I get a social media advertisement about something else. If I visit a different state, I always get Salvation Army ads for a different state, even though I donate in Georgia. So it's a little bit of a confusing situation right now. You might be able to understand why that is the case, because governance is hard. I think that's why they gave us all a Theragun, is because of the pain that governance might cause us. So we see a lot of barriers, not just for the Salvation Army, but across a lot of our clients. And some of those barriers are the fear of slowing down innovation and agility for the sake of governance, limited time and resources that are dedicated towards governance, a perception of governance as a bureaucratic overhead, a reluctance to collaborate across departments, and sometimes even a lack of leadership support and direction. We were wondering, out of sheer curiosity, if any of those resonate with you all, so we put a little thing up, and this is a multi-select. So if you've experienced any of these, we'd love to know. If the answer is other, we'd also really love to know.
If you haven't experienced any of these, we'd love to chat after.
Seriously, a unicorn or something.
What are we seeing? It's fairly well spread across the board.
Yeah, so far, limited time and resources takes the lead, but a lack of leadership support and direction comes in a kind of close second. I like it. I didn't want to admit that the leadership part is such a big portion, so I just tried to imply that it could be possible, but thanks for validating it. Okay. So we suspected we might have a situation on our hand where we were operating with multiple different watches, which weren't synchronized together. And even though we had a strong desire to implement compliance, governance, and consent, and the Salvation Army was really on board with that, they faced significant challenges in doing so. We really needed a way to assess the situation and come up with a viable solution when it came to building a new website. We had some important goals. So in crafting our plan, we wanted to make sure that we were aspiring towards streamlined systems, data governance, privacy-first measurement, informed consent to leverage towards personalized engagement, and all of these would build the foundation towards the Salvation Army's goal of furthering their mission and driving greater impact. And another thing that was mentioned earlier too is trust, right? So for a nonprofit such as this, trust is really something we aspire to, right? And we want to maintain and build upon that trust. Data governance is something that's really going to help us get to that point. So how did we go about assessing the solution and making an action plan? Spoiler alert, it's ObservePoint. That's what you came here to hear about, I think. So, all right, let's see. We were trying to use ObservePoint's auditing capabilities in order to shed light on their entire digital landscape and paint a clearer vision forward alongside the Salvation Army. We wanted to have synchronized smartwatches rather than a drawer full of unsynchronized watches so that we could move forward together. We created an ObservePoint project called a scorecard. And our goals for the scorecard included identifying redundant and improperly configured tags and tools, evaluating third-party cookies, assessing the impact of those tags, tools, and cookies on site performance, and all the while drawing a line towards compliance, consent, and governance, because that was our ultimate mission, is to make sure they understood the need for an overall program. Our methodology was comprehensive. You might ask me, why in the world didn't you just set an audit on the home page of the national site and let it crawl all the pages and be done with it? Well, because their organization's hierarchy and the way they operate and how everything was so different and made for local needs, we utilize a different method to create 54 total ObservePoint scans. And that way we could aggregate and distribute the results to each local team to allow them to actually take action on our findings. We determined what pages we wanted to audit through our Adobe Analytics reporting. And keep that in mind for later. Our source of truth is actually Adobe Analytics, not Google Analytics. So spoiler alert. So we decided on a threshold of visits within a calendar year that a page should have in order to kind of qualify as a key page that we wanted to scan, and pulled all of those URLs into ObservePoint. I wanted to also point out that the strategy about what to scan and how to aggregate the results and communicate those back to our stakeholders was the bulk of the project. Actually setting this up in ObservePoint was relatively easy. Also, I had some help in copying and pasting, so it felt very easy to me, but I had some help. Here is a glimpse of our methodology. I reran this scan about a week ago just to give you an idea for what we saw when we first went in there. And you'll see, if you have a keen eye, many hundreds of accounts. And if, believe it or not, and you'll believe it when you see later, that this is actually an improvement on what we saw earlier this year. So if you can memorize these, you can tell the difference when I tell you what results we communicated back in Q1. We also configured a second national scan, which had privacy and compliance settings. So we sent the GPC signal, we blocked third-party cookies. Furthermore, we used an on-page action where we were checking for the existence of a privacy policy link on every page. I won't share the code with you because I literally stole it from ObservePoint's support site, so you can go and definitely find that yourself and check for the existence of any sort of link. Do not sell, do not share, anything that interests you. It's pretty easy to do. And when we ran this compliance scan and compared to our other scan on the same pages, we found some really important and interesting results, which I will get to shortly. As part of the process, we aggregated all our scan results in a very large spreadsheet. This was for analysis, and in order to create the reports that we shared with stakeholders. We wanted to compare and contrast all the tags and technologies and the outcomes that existed across each division and territory, as well as their donation forms that pertain to those territories. We wanted to compare their different uses of tag managers, analytics platforms, A/B testing tools, because there wasn't one centralized one of any of those. They kind of pick and chose as they needed. I also wanted to call out that we did not use the API to produce this, mostly because we didn't foresee repeating this exact process at this scale in the future, but it's definitely an option that I think would make this a lot easier if you had sweet API skills. And the output was to create a report, one for national and one for each territory that covered the divisions and donation forms within it. Before I get to the specific results, which is in the next few slides, I wanted to call back to this organizational structure and remark about how it created such a challenge with digital data governance. So this is a bit of a reminder of something I said, but we knew that many different teams had ownership over a long period of time over site content and marketing strategies for their local sites. They didn't have a lot of guidance and regulation about what to include and why, and so tags of all types proliferated across the ecosystem. So here we go, key finding number one. Earlier I told you there were 120 different tagging technologies across the ecosystem. There were also about 200 tags per page as a median score, so some of them had upwards of 500 tags on a single page. We noted that that was 2 times industry benchmarks from competitive audits that I have learned today we're not supposed to be doing without their consent, so sorry. But it was a very cool finding, and also 4 times overall benchmarks that were provided by ObservePoint. Additionally, out of the 120 different tagging technologies, 34 of them didn't actually have tag IDs. So they were dropping their tag code and cookies on the site without actually sending data home to the technologies from whence they came, and therefore not actually adding any value for being there. And that seems like an obvious first step of things to clean up or fix, honestly. So we know that each tag was implemented at some point to serve a valuable purpose, but from a performance decision-making as well as marketing efficiency standpoint, it was clear that governance and centralization would benefit them greatly. Our second key finding was that there were governance issues and inefficiencies when it comes to ad pixel types, tag managers, and analytics accounts. Sometimes there were multiple accounts for a single ad pixel running on the same page, which effectively means that campaigns would be bidding against each other for the attention of the same users, and therefore not really adding to our efficiency and spend. Different tag managers running also allowed any user with access to those tag managers to inject any code they want onto the site. And, in theory, they could take down the whole site. And that's, I'm laughing, but it's not very funny. Sorry. I'm laughing because it's awkward. Don't do that. Okay. And it's not a typo. In fact, there were 550 unique GA4 accounts. Adding to that, at the time, there were 412 universal analytics accounts that weren't sending data back because it had already died at that time. We think that a lot of those universal analytics accounts were automatically upgraded, which helped add to the plethora of GA4 accounts that exist. And if you recall, we don't actually use Google Analytics at all as our source of truth. So the fact that these all exist was mostly serving, advertising vendors, maybe local teams, right? But it created a situation where we couldn't effectively democratize our data and tell a single story about what's going on. Everyone's watch was set to a different time, and it was difficult for them to make informed decisions. And last but not least, our third-party cookies. The number of unique third-party cookies that existed is also pretty extraordinarily high. Similar to the number of tags per page, it's 2 times industry benchmarks and 4 times overall benchmarks. There was also no way for a user to control and opt out of those cookies being dropped into their browser. We also had a big aha moment when disabling these cookies. Our ObservePoint scans in comparison noted a 3-second improvement in page load time. So by not loading the cookies, we improved their page load time by 25% in their case. I assume that most of you who care for a website would really love a 3-second improvement in your site's page load time. Well, you can just turn off third-party cookies, apparently. All right, let me see. We have a survey. And now that we're at the end of our results, we're curious if you had any unexpected or interesting results in these categories when you scan your websites.
And while the results come in, I said I wouldn't talk about data democratization, but Abby told me we have plenty of time to spare until we get to the cookies and the evening activity. So I wanted to add a little bit of context, and I'm sure you guys probably understand this at this point, but 550 accounts, most of which, like Allison said, a lot of vendors had set up, a lot of local teams had set up, and the intention was always good, right? Like, the intention wasn't to have a bunch of duplicated data and a bunch of reports and a bunch of GA profiles. It was so that they could have access in real time in their hands to the data that they needed to make decisions to galvanize the support in their local communities. So that kind of was the through line in a lot of our findings. We had to check ourselves as a team because as we were looking at the results, it was kind of mind-blowing, even though we had hypothesized that there would be a lot. Right? But understanding the context of the organization and the decisions that they're trying to make day to day helped us get a better picture into why all those accounts had been created. So that's just one thing we kind of, when we were going through this process, it kind of stood out for us. So I didn't want to take away from the results of the survey, but.
Thanks, Jeremy. All right, so it looks like cookies and tags are amongst the top. I think that makes sense, especially because some of the site performance features are relatively new. So may get more of those in the future that are interesting. Okay, so we identified and communicated risks based on our findings from the ObservePoint audit to the Salvation Army. And they definitely understood these risks and didn't want to maintain this status quo as they've had before as it moves into the development of the new website and our governance strategy. So in addition to a poor user experience and inefficient campaigns, we identified data quality issues, impaired decision making as a result of data quality issues, and of course, legal implications due to a lack of privacy controls. We wanted to make sure to flag these and help develop an action plan immediately, given the relative severity of some of these. So how did we move insights into action? I think it would be really easy if we could just run an ObservePoint scan, drop it in people's lap, and walk away unscathed. But that doesn't help them too much to address the issues that we found. So we're trying to, work with them to make something of meaning. At Drumline, we use 5 pillars that direct our data governance as well as digital strategy overall. And those pillars are people, process, data, technology, and culture. And all those attributes play a critical role in the success of what we're calling a smart governance program. Sometimes the cultural attribute is the one that we must change first, or at least is a top priority in order to affect the rest. In this case, we knew that if we only communicated our findings to a couple of folks up in the national office, and then they tried to dictate to everyone else in the organization what they had to do in order to enact proper governance, we'd be seen as the no police, and everyone would not read our emails anymore, and it would be really sad. So we wanted to gain buy-in around the organization and create real cultural change, help them understand the impact of these findings, and be motivated to help address these. We find that a lot of people we work with get stuck swirling around in the top of this diagram. So they have business outcomes that they're seeking. They select tools and technologies to help them affect their business outcomes, but without the proper foundation of data governance principles, a framework, and these 5 pillars we've identified, it can be really hard to see a lot of success in doing that. We have some specific positive outcomes that we're working towards with the Salvation Army. So all of these are already started, in progress, but we know that you can't just communicate a governance framework and walk away, because that would also be too easy. So we are working with them in an ongoing fashion. Our governance framework communicated standards across the organization and their vendors. We communicated best practices to them so that they'd know what is an acceptable way to install and utilize these things. We help them create a governance committee within their organization, which establishes ownership and accountability for decisions that affect their digital data. We updated our tagging process. So with a new tag request process that requires review and approval, we can apply more oversight and centralization. We streamlined our data sources, which helps reduce wasted implementation and QA time and ensures efficient ad spend. We are continuing to monitor for peak season. So as you might imagine, every year in October, November, December, typically the Salvation Army sees the most of their donations outside of any disaster scenario. So in this case, we're ramping up again to use ObservePoint monitoring, Adobe alerts. We have an on-call process as well as a communication and remediation plan if any issue with tags or the website at large should occur during this critical time. We're also planning differently for new website tagging. That is one of the bigger goals that we had going into this. We're reducing the number of tag managers that are allowed on the site. We're implementing tags based on a data layer that's being served by developers from the application, and we'll be implementing consent management. We'll also continue to utilize ObservePoint in an ongoing way to ensure that the governance standards that we set up continue to be met over time. So from the risks I identified, I flipped them all on their head to talk about the opportunities and benefits of doing that. How would they prioritize anything of these amongst all their other business initiatives? Well, they'll be getting an improved user experience. They'll have more efficient ad campaigns, more reliable data that enables better decision making, and they'll reduce their risk by achieving better legal compliance. We'll also plan to distribute data around the organization from a centralized source of truth rather than allowing 550 GA4 accounts that they can tell whatever story they'd like with. So in this way, we're not just optimizing websites, we're maximizing the Salvation Army's impact on those who need it most. And here's a cheesy callback to our watch metaphor. If you're still operating with multiple watches, maybe it's time to get them synchronized. We see governments as not just a technical necessity, but as a strategic imperative for any organization. Imagine the clarity and efficiency you could bring to your organization with smart governance.
I'd be remiss to not add that, and it's still on the table, but we had talked about what we affectionately dubbed the nuclear option. And I'm sure a lot of you maybe consider that every once in a while, but the option was, well, they're moving to a new site, so why don't we just wipe everything out and see who calls us? see who calls us wondering where their Google Analytics data is. And we hypothesized that there might be fewer calls than maybe 550. But in all seriousness, that was when we were saying we have to make these cultural changes, we realized very quickly that the nuclear option was never a real option. And so that's been the path that we've been pursuing with them. It's all about how can we synchronize these watches? How can we get everybody on the same page? And like Allison said, it will most certainly be a never-ending journey, right? Because no matter what, new systems will come about, new methods of measurement will come about, maybe cookies go away, just kidding. But it's certainly an ongoing process with the Salvation Army. So we're really just beginning the journey at this stage. So, Q&A. Any questions? No? Everybody wants their cookies. Oh, we've got two. Yep, go ahead. Oh, okay. Yep, here we go.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely still in the process of doing this, and I felt like we had buy-in from our national stakeholders as to the importance of it, but then we had to go and kind of do a roadshow where we presented the results that were specific to each other team and convey to them the importance of understanding and acting on this information. So I'd say it's kind of a matter of taking it in bite-sized chunks. They would come back with, oh, well, okay, I see we have this many cookies. On which pages? Where are they coming from? And so we generated the reports and gave them those, and they can start to, work one by one down a list of what's most, important and urgent to address and not, and then understand the plan for when they get their nice, shiny new website, how to kind of start there from the ground up.
Yeah, and I would add we were definitely not blind to the issue. We've been working with them for a decade. We understand enough about what has been configured outside of our direct control. And when this project came around, which as is still the case, is a digital transformation process. It's collapsing all of these sites into one single domain. We had a lot of conversations around like, this is our moment. This might not come for 5 years, 10 years. The last time they redid their website was many, many years ago. So we wanted to focus on the key messaging and what was going to resonate and really from a leadership level drive some change. And I also have to say that part of the cultural rethinking that we were trying to influence was testing some of the messaging. And when you go, and probably most of you understand this, when you go into a room and you talk about the what ifs when it comes to the financial implications of a lawsuit or the brand reputation that could take a hit, it's very abstract. And we started to find, and you saw in the results where that duplication of ad tags was one of the more resonant messages we could have, where they literally had multiple different Facebook conversion events, different IDs, and we took that and we explained that what you are literally doing is bidding against yourselves. You are giving Facebook more money when you could just have one global tag and set up your campaigns accordingly. And so when it started to come back to the ROI conversation, that certainly piqued some interest and became one of those points we leaned into. The GA4 example as well was another example of how their ability to make decisions off the data that they have is very limited when they've got that many accounts. So we're still trying to figure out, every time we run into a roadblock, we kind of just like, okay, what's the next thing what's the next piece of data that we can give them? And ObservePoint has played, a very critical role in that.
It's always the money, though. Yeah. They care about the money.
Well, in this case, the money goes to good, so we feel better about it. Yeah, go ahead.
On your command and control slide that you had, where you show the different cores and everything, and you talked about how so many people had their hands in the development of the sites and things like that, and you had to pare that back. How did you convince people that they could no longer have their hands on that, and how did they take it?
Outside of our purview. No, we work with a partner agency. The other key part to this, right? And we'd love to work with anybody in this room, but the truth is, working with a company for 10 years and having that relationship embedded kind of gives you the opportunity to influence the cultural change quicker. And when it came to that idea, it always had been talked about. But again, when they were at a national level, they knew, okay, we've got to get to this point. But to say, we got to take some of the content creation out of the hands of certain folks, like it just doesn't resonate, and there was a lot of resistance. And we were just, our role was to give as much data, whether it's from Adobe Analytics, whether it's from our scans, for whatever we could give them to help them understand the inefficiency it's creating. It will still be something they will have to reckon with going into the future. They're going to have to think about how, within a consolidated site, will they enable content creation, because there is something truly important and remarkable, and I encourage you guys to go to the websites and see the stories that they talk about of the people that they serve. There's a really important aspect of that can't go away, because it's such an important part about telling the story of the Salvation Army and that local focus. But it creates challenges. It always does. Any other questions? Yeah.
You talked about you talked about a new tag creation approval process. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that looks like? We've got privacy that has been doing a particular approval process for that for a long time, and our IT security group just now kind of coming into that and trying to get them both on the same page has been a little bit of a challenge.
Jason up here. No, just kidding. We've got several folks from our team who
we'll
are deeply entrenched. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, at a high level, right? It's about having a centralized place where all the requests have to funnel through, and they have criteria of which they apply to every tag as to whether it's allowable, it makes strategic sense, it makes business sense, there's maybe enough spend behind it to justify the costs of implementing and QAing it. So in our framework, we've helped to establish those best practices, and then we have our advertising partners actually enacting that filter that keeps things from getting to us before it has been reviewed and approved by a team. So I think that's really important. And then as a next step, we've also laid out for them to having things actually approved by legal, right? And having that lens on it, because it's honestly not something I think they've delved into yet, but we know and have identified that and communicated that it's a cross-team collaboration and that there needs to be an actual privacy impact assessment of every technology that's utilized before it gets approved for placement.
Yeah, I know we're represented by a lot of folks in the room, but I'm gonna do a show of hands question. So the short answer is we've had these forms and this process for a while, and again, it's one of those things where it's just like learning how to fine tune. This year, the focus was we've got to bring in marketing and media and make them accountable, right? And like bring them into the process, because we are on the furthest end of the spectrum. We're placing the tag. We try to instill some strategy or some strategic thinking around asking, why is this tag necessary? What is its purpose? But until we brought in our media partners to the process, who have been very helpful, they just were not inherently included it in before, who are going and saying, hey, yeah, like we've got a Facebook universal tag. Let's use that. Let's talk to your local vendors about how they can report on their campaign performance and think about attribution differently and things like that. So we brought them into the process. And the other thing that we really ramped up is education. The cultural change is never going to come just by implementing process and automation. It was never going to come with the nuclear option, right? But it has to come with the education. And again, you've got these very mission-oriented folks who've been with the Salvation Army. We didn't talk about the Salvation Army and their officers and the structure of how they actually live and work within the Salvation Army, and it's a very interesting and unique system. But a lot of these people have been with the organization forever. So the cultural change has to come from education, and we really ramped up those efforts this year and anticipate having to continue to do that. It's all about socializing the value, but also the rationale behind things. All right, any other questions? Cool.
I think they all want cookies.
Yeah, cookie time.